You're listening to the Forest School podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
Are we all off work on a Friday? Is this what we've done? Are we all...
Is that normal for you?
Yeah, my project is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So, yeah, no Mondays or Fridays for me.
Long weekends for your whole life.
You say that, but it rarely feels like a weekend. I've always got meetings and loads of admin to catch up on. So,
yeah, and your project is the garden.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was trying to remember how I first sort of saw your name pop up, and I think it was like through Facebook or something. And then I kept probably like one of those maybe Forest School chat things, and I kept seeing your name come up, and every time your name came up I was like, oh yeah, that's an interesting point. Oh yeah. And then I saw your thing about well, do you know when you meet people online but you don't actually meet them, and I don't think we've ever actually even spoken to each other online, but then I joined your self-directed education portfolio group, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then Lewis and I were talking about what we wanted to pod about, and I was like, I really want to do some stuff on like democratic education, self-directed education, and I thought, but that's a really good topic to get somebody in to speak with us from a kind of their point of view. And I was like, who do I know? I was like, yes, Artemis. So that's kind of like the backstory as to how this podcast ended up. But I'm sure I also saw some stuff about the garden and thought, you guys are running a sort of similar-ish thing to what we're doing. And I see that you're a home educator as well, and you built the project sort of partially through educating your own children as part of a learning community. Can you tell us a little bit about the garden and what you do?
Yeah, of course. We actually don't refer to ourselves as democratic anymore, interestingly.
Okay, that's interesting.
We've moved away from it because we realised that we don't vote, we make decisions by consensus, and we don't have committees. So actually we're not democratic, we're sociocratic. But nobody knows what sociocratic means, so we're kind of a bit floundering for what we call ourselves at the moment.
Do you want to explain what that means then?
Yeah, sure. So we make decisions by consensus. And that's it. That's it really. It's all about the core of what we do is really about consent. And I'm increasingly using the word consent to describe what we do, because that applies to the learning as well as the social and emotional side of things. It's all about consent, which is something that I've borrowed from someone called Sophie Christovy, who runs a project called The Cabin, which is another really amazing project. There's a sort of a bit of in the self-directed education projects community, there's a bit of a tug of war, I guess, about what we call ourselves. Yeah. And I'm not particularly interested in the naming of it particularly, but I suppose it is really important that we define what we do in a concise way that we can communicate to people really well. Democratic worked for a while, but I've realised that actually we're not actually democratic. Yeah. What it looks like is that we have meetings and we spend a lot of time talking about things and making decisions, and that the process is more important than the result, which is, as an adult, is really difficult, because we want to get vision and we want to make things happen and we want to, but actually I have to constantly remind myself, no, it's the process. That's where the learning is really happening.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I had that exact thought yesterday when so the reason obviously we want to talk about this as well is there's a huge overlap with Forest School and the kind of Forest School principles and ethos, and yesterday I had this really long, and an adult looking at it would probably describe it as quite tortuous discussion about
it felt torturous from the outside.
It did. So what game are we going to play now? So there's definite need and drive from a lot of all the young people that I was talking to play a game. Like, we've just played a game and we already enjoyed it, and now we want to play another game. what game are we going to play? And this discussion was so long and had so many little twists and turns and little pathways off into different ideas, and one person going, hang on, that game we played the other day, but then I got really upset when we played that game, so how can we change the rules? And all of this discussion. And as an adult, of course, as you just described, my impulse was like, I just need to solve this problem. I need to solve this problem, and I'm the adult, so I should have an idea up my sleeve that I can go, hey guys, we're playing this game and this is going to solve all your problems. But actually that wasn't what they needed. They needed, as you just described, to talk about it, to listen to each other, to either come to a compromise or not, or to just the conversation just sort of ended, didn't it, Lewis? It sort of fizzled out, but it lasted a good long time. And in the end, I think they all went off in different directions and a game wasn't played. But absolutely, as you say, the learning experience is happening through that space, and you holding that space for them and going, okay, let's all listen to each other. In your project, what's the balance of like adults to children? Like when you're having these meetings, is it usually just like you and the young people, or is it like quite a few adults involved in discussions?
So I'm a registered childminder, which the reason why I am is because it means that people can get access funding, help with the funding. So and I work with 2 assistants. So there are 3 adults at the project. We call them mentors. It sort of changed over the years, so it's kind of been like facilitators, mentors, or I don't know. I think we've settled on mentors now. And there are 3 of us, and at the moment there are 15 children, because that's what we are limited to legally. That's what out of school settings are limited to. So that's what we've got. It's a bit of a grey area with how many we could have, but so that kind of makes it easier for us at the moment. 3 adults, 15 children, simples. We could potentially have more, but at the moment we don't. And I think the role of the adults in those meetings is to model more than anything what you do in a meeting. And there's a chair in our meeting, so there's someone who is holding the space, and that rotates around on an alphabetical list of names. So the young people also chair, including the very, very youngest one. So we have 5-year-olds chairing meetings sometimes, which is interesting because that's something that I was quite resistant to. I was sort of the view that we needed to have the meetings only chaired by people who are experienced, so not necessarily just adults, but maybe just the older ones, because that's what's common in democratic. I think the democratic schools sort of say normally about 9ish you can start chairing meetings. But actually, while I had a period when I wasn't working directly at the garden very much, it was mainly other people who were working directly with the young people for personal reasons. And it was instituted then that the younger, anyone of any age could chair the meetings, and they were completely right, and it's brilliant, and it's such a great experience for them. We absolutely have 5-6-year-olds who completely competently chair these meetings and hold that space brilliantly, which is incredible to see, and it gives them so much confidence that they can do that.
So what kind of, that is amazing. What kind of things have you had meetings about recently, without obviously going into too much personal information about your learners, but what kind of issues are they discussing?
Oh yeah, sure. So I might tell you about how when we do the meetings, because that'll kind of lead on to that. We have a meeting every morning before we start, and we always check in with our feelings and our energy levels. So we just get people to sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, or anywhere in between for both of those things, and then check whether anybody has any needs around those feelings or energy levels. And where we say, are you comfortable with your feelings, rather than saying, are your feelings good or bad, because you can have a bad feeling but still be comfortable with it, and vice versa. And so it's we didn't want to kind of put judgment on any particular feelings. And first thing on a Tuesday, we will start with what we call a learning circle meeting. So it's all about planning what we're going to do for the week. The young people are assigned a learning mentor who they make individual plans with, and they decide what they want to do and how they want to spend their time at the garden. And then anything they think anybody else might be interested in joining, they will then share in the learning circle meeting. And they'll say, I'm going to do this thing, does anyone want to join me? And then we can plan more meetings about those particular projects, and endless meetings. So people get very bored in the meetings. People are always like, when is the meeting going to end? But actually they go on because people have a lot to say in them.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, talking about making plans, deciding how to spend budget is a big one.
Ooh.
So we have a budget for the season that they can spend on whatever they want to. It's £100 for what we call a season, so that's a block of 6 weeks, and they can spend on that for any projects they're interested in, anything particularly that they want to get for the garden. And there's a lot of engagement with that. People really enjoy it, and there's a lot of really good, like, heated discussion about the budget and how it's going to be spent, and a lot of exploration of the power dynamics involved in that as well, which is really interesting. We talk about power dynamics a lot. And then Tuesday morning meetings tend to be a little bit longer than usual because we do the learning circle, and then we have a short meeting on Wednesday and Thursday morning, which is usually just a check-in, and then anything really urgent that comes up we'll discuss. So it could be ongoing issues, anything that's come up that needs to be resolved in a meeting with the whole community. And then Thursday afternoon, before we go off for the weekend, we have what we call a full meeting, and that's where we can discuss serious or ongoing issues that we haven't managed to resolve in the week. So there might be an issue that's come up about the use of space, or about at the moment, a lot of the time it's rough play and boundaries and consent in rough play, because it's always a thing. Power dynamics, things where people maybe are feeling left out, and they want kind of the view of the whole community to sort of help them resolve issues. We try to keep it only to either ongoing issues that haven't been able to be resolved, or serious incidents. So there might be like a one-off serious incident. So if someone got like more than just a little bit hurt, they were kind of really upset by something, then that would be something we need to discuss in the meeting. But usually we try and do a conflict resolution during the day, so we're not spending more time in meetings than we need to. So try to resolve it as we go along, but if not, then we can bring it to a meeting.
Do you find anything comes up in terms of energy levels with because reflecting is the kind of forest school equivalent, I guess, of those end of day meetings, and Gemma and I are always banging our heads on the wall, might be a strong term, but that thing of the importance of reflecting and sharing at the end of a session and going, okay, let's almost unpack everything before we go home, let's get everything out on the table. But then you combine that with, well, when is that in terms of their energy level? It's at the point where their energy level is at the lowest, and their mental kind of the glucose that we've got in our brains is all been spent through the day. And then at the end of the day to go, right, okay, can we have you doing the least physically active, most mentally taxing job right at the end of it? It's always really tricky. And I think we've adapted some of our stuff to do sort of mini check-ins and reflections through the day. So we fill up a blackboard of things that we're enjoying or that are tricky. But is that something that you find as well? Is it something your learners adapt to it being the end of the day and they know it's coming, so it's slightly different? Or, how do you manage that energy, I guess?
Yeah, it has been a really big issue, and in the past we've discussed moving that big meeting somewhere else in the week, so it's not at the end of the day. Since I've been really heavily involved again, so since September, it doesn't seem to have been as much of an issue. But yeah, it's definitely an issue, but it also feels really important to everyone to have that check-in before we go off for the weekend. So I don't know, it's a really tricky one. And I guess we do end up sometimes, if we can't resolve something on a Thursday because of things like energy levels and people not really being able to engage with it, then sometimes it will roll over to the Tuesday morning meeting.
Find out about CPD courses at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yeah. So do you have somebody kind of minuting those meetings so you remember what's been said? And is that always an adult, or how are those notes taken?
Yes, we do. And at the moment it is always an adult. And that's partly because we're making a big effort with documentation at the moment and trying to be really thorough with our documentation. So for the adults at the garden, it's really important that we have really thorough notes on what's been said. We have had young people minuting in the past, and we might explore that again, particularly with some of the older ones. But I would want to do some sort of one-to-one sort of like training with someone who was up for that, to be able to do that, so they knew that it was kind of making sure that everything was really thoroughly covered, I think. Yeah,
we take I wouldn't describe them as minutes. It's more like writing down to keep a record on a blackboard, and our kind of end of the day reflections usually are quite quick, and so it will be kind of like 1 or 2 word lists, bullet points, or whatever on our blackboard. And yesterday, for the first time I think ever, one of our learners decided to lead that reflection and wanted to write the responses on the blackboard. And it happened to be a learner who doesn't ever usually engage with writing at all. So it was like, wow, this is really special. And then, needed a bit of support to write those down. But it was a kind of like that thing you described about modelling, and how sometimes you might think, I'd really like more engagement from this group or this person. And actually that will come if you're just modelling and modelling and modelling. And you might need to model something for, in this case, for this learner, 2 years, maybe longer, Lewis, do you think? Yeah. And that was the day that they decided, actually, I'm going to do this. And it completely came from them. It was nothing about me suggesting, how about you have a go? It was just, hey guys, let's do what was fun, what was tricky. It's like, whoa, they've got the chalk in their hand. It was a really special moment.
There's a lot of patience involved in this work, and holding our nerve.
It's holding our nerve, isn't it? But it's also holding like a lot of education, I think, systems and analysis is looked at in a very short period of time. How is your behavior management within the first 2 weeks of inheriting a class at school? What is your behavior management like at the end of the year when you hand them over? How do the children settle in after 3 weeks at your home ed group? And it's really, sometimes it's holding up against like not the outside world, because it's not an us and them situation, but holding up and going, I really do think this is going to work. It's almost like you're constantly going, just a little bit longer. I know this is going to work. I know, and I'm sure, I'd imagine with your work, you have sort of a similar thing where you go, I know this is going to come out. Do you have any success stories that you kind of refer to of learners that have been through your process, and you go, they started here and look at what they're doing now?
Yeah, loads. Yeah, it's really cool. It's a long game. It's totally a long game, and particularly with behavior. I'm not a fan of the term behavior management, because I feel like it just doesn't describe what we do. Because we don't use any manipulative language at all, so we don't use any judgment. We try anyway. It's hard to get it all the time, but we try never. We don't use any rewards or punishments. We just talk about everything to death, which I think sometimes feels like a punishment. But it's not intended to be. And it's a long game, and sometimes it takes people a while to get their heads around it, and particularly if young people are used to being in a manipulative environment, it can take a while to get their heads around, actually, you're not going to get in trouble. We just want to talk about this and make things better. This isn't about you being in trouble here. But what we find is that after a time, they do get it, and they relax into it, and they understand that's what's happening. What we find is that they come to us to resolve conflict, and even people who would be typically regarded as the aggressors in a situation, in a different sort of setting, and who would be the person who would receive the punishment, even that person will seek us out because they actually want to resolve it. They're not afraid of getting in trouble, which is amazing. And they don't have sort of, they're not what's the word, they're not sort of avoiding resolving that conflict, which is amazing.
Yeah, what you were just saying reminds me of a few learners we've had where they've come to our setting, and then obviously everybody's home life is different, isn't it? And the way that their parents and their family kind of deal with behaviour or things that happen, and some of our learners, both historically and now, don't just come to us as a setting. They might go to school part-time or go somewhere else, and then that's kind of an extra sort of challenge both for us and for them in terms of getting to know how things are dealt with here compared to wherever else they've been or at home. And over time, definitely they relax into it. Children are capable of amazing flexibility, aren't they? And because everything's new to them, the world is new, and so they do adapt to, I'm here in the woods and this is the approach, and they do get it. But for some young people, it does take a while, or if they've just started school or a new setting. And even my own daughter, very articulately, when she was 3 or nearly 4, she was going to a preschool a couple of days a week and coming to our forest kindergarten one day a week.
There's a puppy.
Oh, amazing. Hi, puppy. And she explained to me, oh, hello, puppy. Oh, puppy on lap. She was able to say, preschool is different to forest school because at preschool, the adults say, don't sort things out yourself. If there's a problem, come and find a grown-up. But at kindergarten,
people can't see. Artemis is genuinely hiding in their hands.
Yeah. But at forest, she was able to say this to me at either 3 or 4 years of age, and saying, at forest school, we say, stop that, I don't like it, or we get people to listen to us, and then if it doesn't work, then we find a grown-up. But I think basically she'd had this experience where she'd gone in to help some of her peers in the classroom at preschool, and an adult had seen her do it and said, don't do that, stop, you need to find a grown-up. And it was interesting that she even was aware of this difference of approach. And she was able to deal with it.
Way to disempower someone. That's incredible.
It's really weird, isn't it? But yes,
we've always said that I have the utmost. I can't quite. It's a mixture of respect and empathy and sympathy for. In particularly primary schools, mealtime assistants, people that are out on the playground are often the least trained in child development, in behaviour management, in any of these systems that you want to put in, but they're in the absolute throes of where does all the play happen, where does all the thing happen. So I can completely empathise that if my job is I go into a school from 12 till 1 and I stand on the playground, like we've just said, that getting children to conflict resolve independently is a really long and difficult process. If you are dumped in for an hour a day with a playground of 200 students and they've all been cooped up all day, I can see how you just fall back on systems I'll do it because that's the easiest in the short term.
Yeah.
So it's that thing, isn't it, of we can look at that and go, that is not helping those children, but I can empathize with the adult in a mealtime
it's
system.
For the benefit of the adults, it's not for the benefit of the children.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
which is what a lot of these things that happen are. It is for the benefit of the adults, and a lot of the assessment and a lot of the pressures we put on children, it's not for the benefit of them, it's for the benefit of the adults, so we can say, look how well we're doing.
Yeah. I read about in your article on Medium, I read that you mentioned that you had some research conducted at your project about behaviour. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So a master's student from the University of Bristol came and conducted some research specifically around our unconditional approach to behaviour management, so not using any rewards or punishments. And they wanted to have a look at how complex the moral thinking of the young people at the garden was compared to previous research conducted in schools. And what they found is that young people at the garden had significantly advanced moral thinking compared to the previous research. And what that means is that when they were given moral dilemmas, instead of referring to authority, so a teacher or the police or parents or the law or rules, they were talking about things in terms of the impacts on the people involved in the moral dilemma. So they were really thinking it through with empathy rather than just jumping to what the rules were, which is exactly what you want. You want them to be having building a real sense of morality, not just like rules equals morality, because we know that's not true. There's no morality in duty.
That's amazing.
And that's what a lot of Alpha Cohn's work is, isn't it? Alfie Cohn's kind of whole thing is about, what do children do when they're not being watched? And I think I can't remember which of his books it was in, but it really spoke to me in a weird way when he was talking about children that go through school dependent on praise, or through their childhood, I guess, dependent on praise and sort of reinforcement from someone else, and then saying that at a certain point, whether it's higher education or whether it's the working world, and they stop getting we stop getting all that praise and stuff, and that can be a real jolt for some people. And his horror situation in that was like, that's when someone slightly nefarious can come in and start praising a child and can get them into immoral things, or crime that they might, because they're getting the praise and they've been taught that, taught in terms of like conditioned to go, that person is praising me and telling me I'm doing a good job. That for me,
just seeking reward. And
it means that their sense of self-esteem is coming from an external source rather than internal, and it makes you very easy to manipulate, which is it's not good on a personal level, but it's also not, I think it's really dangerous on a societal level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about education as preparing young people for a future in which they are successful by whatever means you want to measure success through, happiness and well-being and what they're putting into the world, as opposed to just financial reward, then spending time on those skills is surely more important than sort of knowledge-based curriculum stuff, isn't it? Because we can't predict the future, as what everyone says. We don't know what jobs are going to be available. We don't know what the world is going to look like when these young people
or if any jobs are going to be available, to be perfectly honest. Automation is not going anywhere, and most jobs are not going to exist in the future.
Our forest school leaders got a while. We're all right.
We'll be fine. It's the World Economic Forum's top 10 employable skills are all creativity, people skills, and a little bit of tech. That's it. Like those are the employable skills now, and it's only gonna keep going in that direction. And things like creativity and people skills are just not what schools do. It's just not. That those are the two things that you really need to, and creativity isn't sitting down and everyone painting an identical picture. That's not creativity. Creativity is the freedom to explore your own inner sense of creativity. That's what creativity is. It isn't like the skills which you can learn at any point, which is why we concentrate on the tools for learning. Because if I often say about the garden, even if the young people who come to the garden never learn anything else while they were there, and of course they learn loads all the time, even if they just left as emotionally secure human beings with good social skills, they're always going to be fine. Like from a conventional success point of view, they're going to be fine. People who have those things do all right in life. Everything else can come, and it can come later, and it can come at different time, particularly if they've got really good learning skills. But you can't replace. There's a window of development for those things that if you miss it, it's gone. It's very, very hard to come back and do those things later.
Especially when all that neuroplasticity stuff is saying how adaptable children's brains are, and particularly teenagers, and kind of deciding what you want your brain to be good at, and then going, right, well, I will practice those skills. And if you need to be sociable, you need to have time to be sociable. Gemma and I were talking yesterday about this is so drilled down into like one example, but Gemma, you were asking me, saying, do you think the more of a relationship you have with the learners, the less well like proffering skills works, because when you're new to a group, you can kind of go, hey guys, I think they need to learn how like secateurs work safely. So I'm going to get some secateurs out. I've got some activities where secateurs might be the thing. And if you're really new to a group, then that kind of works a bit. You've got a bit of kind of just follow the leader. I'm the, normally the tallest one and the loudest one. I can kind of get through some stuff. And then it's moved now to with some of our learners where they just go, nah, and they just will walk off, which is great. Yeah. But then they might come back a couple of hours later, and because their project now needs secateurs, now they're interested in it. And now, you can't sort of manipulate them into going, I think you should learn this, so please learn this. You have to wait until their interest needs it, and then they'll go, okay, show me how this works. I'm coming to you now, sort of intrinsically motivated to get this knowledge skill, which is a very different thing. The outcome is still they've practiced with secateurs, but the path was different.
Applications for Forest School training are now open at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
When you need to learn something, you learn it really quickly and thoroughly. So this idea that you need to spend years and years in school being drilled with things, it's only true because of the way in which school works. If you have a need to learn something, so the maths that comes out of creating budgets is fantastic. And yes, we do very little sort of written representation of maths. But so I last year I did a PGCE, a primary PGCE with a maths specialism, and I'm really passionate about maths because it's so badly done. And what I discovered is that and this is uncontroversial at all in maths pedagogy, is that the real world understanding of maths, the relational understanding of maths, so what maths actually is way more important than what maths looks like on paper. Yeah. People think that what maths is what you write down, and that isn't maths. That's not what's actually happening. It's what's really happening, and that the foundation for understanding maths really, so you can take it far if you want to, that comes from real world stuff. And so my eldest is 9, and she was in school for 1 year against my wishes. Long story, I won't go into it. And when she first started, she hadn't ever done any formal mathematics. To begin with, she struggled with the formal representation of maths because she was unfamiliar with it. Within a year, she was top of her class for maths, because she'd had a really firm grounding in that relational mathematics. And her teacher was astonished. Her teacher didn't understand why this was happening. She was absolutely baffled by it. But this was at the point where I was doing this maths specialism PGCE, and I was like, aha, I can explain to you what this is. And it's because actually that written form of it can come later, and it can come at any time, and it can come if they need it and when. Like if they want to go and do a maths GCSE, then they can go and learn that. And because they've got that really good grounding in real world maths, they understand what maths is and how it's used. That can come later. It's not the endless writing out sums. That's not what maths is. Sorry, I've gone on a wild tangent about maths.
It's really interesting. So you mentioned talking about budgets and deciding, those kind of things. What other kind of real world maths happens either through your sort of home ed experience or at the garden?
Making shops is really popular. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the currency is sometimes they make their own money. But often the currency is things like crab apples or leaves, or if there's anything that's a little bit uniform, they'll collect lots of it and then they'll trade in. And sometimes they buy currency with currency, which is really confusing. Yeah, but I suppose it's a lesson in how money is just representative of a promise. So there's lots of good conversations you can have about the nature of money and what it is and what it isn't, and debt, and sparks off. So that's really popular. Other kinds of maths. There's a lot of geometry as well. There's a lot of kind of when you're building stuff and having to measure things. And another thing that I found really interesting from my PGCE, we were told primary school children really struggle with time and money. And as a home educator, I was like, what? They said, yeah, it's the hardest things to teach primary school children. I was like, this blew my mind, because I don't think I've ever met a home educated child that doesn't understand money or time, because they're using it all the time. There's no, money and time are the two things that my eldest learnt first. Yeah. And that's what helped her have a really good sense of maths, was counting money and using money, and going to the shops, and because you're out in the world and you're using it and you're doing it. And she needed to know the time, because we needed to know when we needed to go to our session, and wanted to know when things were finishing and we were going to go, and all those conversations that build that mathematical understanding that don't happen in school, because it's displaced by formal lessons and endless and really involved behavior management.
Money is my little selling to other children that come. So we have groups that come for home ed, and we have groups that come on a Saturday, and they're school children, that's their Saturday club. And so sometimes they'll see like something that's been built or some remnants of play, and they'll go, who's done this? No one comes here in the week. And I'm like, yeah, some children come here instead of going to school. And one, that blows their mind. And then two, they're like, so they don't have to learn anything? And I go, whoa. And I go, well, like you sit down on a piece of paper, you sit down with some paper and you read that thing, and it says, Sally went to the shop with £2.50. She bought 5 sweets. How much money did she have at the end of it? And they're like, yeah, we did that this week. Or, oh yeah, we've done that. And I go, right, well, they go to the shop with £2.50. And not only do they get the maths, but they get the sweets as well. And they're like, Ma, if they could swear, the kids would, I swear they would be going like, Gianni, little, which
totally.
You want to sell home ed, that's the little story.
Exactly, that's the thing. It's you don't need, and again, like in maths they say it's those stories that children really struggle with. They might find that doing the sums, because they can get the process of doing the sum really easily, but because they don't really understand what's happening behind it, the story problems they really struggle with. And again, I'm like, what?
But if you're sitting at a desk, there are so many layers of thinking involved in having a worksheet put in front of you. There's so many layers that you have to plough through before you get to the actual maths there. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You've got to control your impulses, sit in a chair, try and focus, try and ignore what everyone else is doing, look at the piece of paper, read the problem and read it in order and process that, look at the weird picture and diagram, and then start thinking about what the actual maths is. That's totally. What's kind of
and there's nothing tangible to move around often. I know sometimes they'll give groups like counters or pretend money or something, but once it becomes that abstract, just read it. You're like, well, that's in the I suppose that is in the world now. I just put my phone in front of things and then I cry when I see my bank account. Like that's the kind of maths we have now. There's nothing physically changing hands.
Yeah. So they are trying. So maths is actually a lot more progressive now in schools than English is. And I was really heartened by the curriculum is decided by policymakers, which is, not great, because they have their own agenda. But the maths teachers and certainly my lecturers during my PGCE were like, there's ways you can get around it, and you can try to make it as real world as you can and as physical as you can. And particularly with sort of the first few years of school, like there is a big emphasis on trying to make it as physical and real world as possible within the constraints of the curriculum. So I do have some hope. English is just flipping lost cause at the moment. It would be hard for it to be more prescriptive than it is now.
And the grammar, all of that stuff.
Spag.
It's just ridiculous. Why does a 6-year-old need to know what a fronted adverbial is? I just don't, and I cannot understand. If they want to know that, that's great. If they're geeky about grammar, brilliant. Let's go for it. Let's learn all of the grammatical terms. I didn't learn what a fronted adverbial was until I did my PGCE, but I can well use one. I know how to use one.
But do you think that is, I guess, a theme to what we're talking about? With kind of all these different aspects, whether it's maths or literacy or social and emotional stuff. And it's that kind of, the view might be that, well, in school, we need to have like 3 PHE lessons, PHSE or whatever it is now, lessons a week to practice, what do you do when you find a wallet? You take it to the police station, or to go, right, they need to have literacy every day. Or they need to be having 100 questions about shops, because the perception is that setting up a shop and making money and doing all of that like prep work is like wasted time, because you go, well, I can give them the paper and they could answer the question straight away. But you're like, right, but once they get to the maths in a real world or imaginary world context, or the social emotional stuff in a play context, it's so much more powerful than the 100 questions will ever be, that it then becomes almost, because
they learn it like that when they want to, and they're developmentally ready and interested. They just learn it like that. You don't need endless repetition and practicing, because they want to do it and they get it first time. It's so frustrating. And like we know that reading for pleasure is I'm sort of talking about things in terms of conventional academic success. Reading for pleasure is the number one indicator of future success, in inverted commas. And yet that's what we know. There's a negative correlation between systematic synthetic phonics and the enjoyment of reading and the reading for pleasure, basically. And yet we still do it, because technically they are able to read younger and younger with systematic synthetic phonics. Technically they can pass those tests. Yeah, great, they can do it. But the actual enjoyment of reading is going down, because it takes the joy out of it. We know that reading with children is what they really need. Instead of literacy lessons, I don't understand why we don't just have loving books lessons. That's what it should be about, reading to and with children and them joining in as and when they're ready and want to. Loving literature is how you get literacy. It just seems so obvious to me, rather than trying to make them technically be able to read earlier and earlier and earlier.
Can I ask just to kind of go, because I think we could all, the three of us could sit here and agree with each other and put the whole world to right, which would be very enjoyable. But people listening might be like, I could be here for days. Can I ask? So I guess one of the things, and if anybody's listening and thinking this kind of democratic, sociocratic thing sounds really interesting, and I can almost imagine the questions coming. Do you have many experiences where we as forest school leaders are always weighing up that when are we leaders, when are we facilitators, and in the way that you might go, well, I will let them fail at X because I think that will be valuable, or I can see that that's not quite going to work, but I can step back. And that's very interesting to watch someone get some woodworking wrong, as opposed to getting some social stuff wrong, and go, you can watch someone and go, they are being a real knobhead. I wonder what's going to come out of this, or kind of that kind of thing. Do you have much stuff in your meetings that you sit there? Do you voice things if you go, I don't think that's going to go well? Or do you sit very quietly and go, I'm just going to let them, if you had a group that said, we want 100 quid and we're going to spend that 100 quid on marshmallows, just to be the devil's advocate,
Yeah, so I definitely do get involved, and it's a constant checking in with myself about whether that's the right thing to do. I probably do more than I probably err on the side of probably doing it more than I should, because that's my nature, and it's something that I have to constantly keep a check on, rather than, because I'm quite I get involved kind of a personality, and I have to be. So this is one of the reasons why we talk about power dynamics a lot, and we talk about, all the adults at the garden, we talk about our power dynamics with each other and with the young people, and it's a constant reflection basically on whether that's okay, whether it's right, and we try to actively encourage us being able to address things with each other. So I actively and especially because there is a power dynamic with the fact that I'm employing my childminding assistants. We are supposedly, equals, but there is still a power dynamic there. And so I have to sort of say, please, if you think I'm not doing something that's aligned with our values, please pull me up on it, because I'm not going to get it right all the time, and we have to be able to have those conversations, because I'm not always going to notice when I'm doing something that isn't aligned, and I want to be pulled up on it. I want to have those conversations, and I think it's really good for all of us to practice not being defensive and just going, oh yeah, I could have done that differently. So I feel like I've sort of avoided the question a little bit.
So has it ever come up that there's been a decision that you as an adult can look at and go, my experience and judgment says that will not be successful, but they need to go through that process of voting something in that's not beneficial to learn from. And sometimes we talk about, because our groups are long-term and churning through, you kind of realise that one group needs to get it wrong, but then that wisdom will get passed through. When those kids are a bit older, they'll pass it on to the younger children without the younger children having to make the same mistake. Do you have that same stuff going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure, all the time. And I do definitely sit back sometimes and say, well, actually, I know this. I know I have a really strong feeling this isn't going to work, but I'm not gonna get involved. I'm gonna just let you learn that for yourselves. And then sometimes I'm really surprised, because sometimes it does work. I'm wrong. I'm not always right. There's a really interesting example of that with our first ever agreement that we made. So we don't have rules, we have agreements, and they're made by the whole community, and the adults don't have more of a say than the children in creating them. The only exception to that is safety things, but that's as a moral and legal duty there. And so the agreements are made by the whole community, and they're also adaptable and flexible. So if they're not working for the community, anyone can say, right, okay, I'm not a fan of this agreement. Can we change it or get rid of it? Or I want to add a new one. And our first ever agreement that we made was no sticks in the yurt.
Okay.
And I was not in favour of this agreement. I just thought, that was unworkable. It just, wasn't going to work. But I was wrong. It did. It fixed the issue, which is people getting hurt with sticks in the yurt. It just fixed it, and everyone was happy with it. And it's still an agreement. It has been for 5 years. No sticks in the yurt.
Yeah. Going kind of linking to what Lewis was just saying about perhaps playing devil's advocate against self-directed education generally, or settings where that's possible. So obviously the Sudbury School is quite a famous democratic school with and Summerhill I want to talk about a little bit, as historically being this kind of experimental school. And I was talking with somebody about it the other day who said their friend went. This was somebody probably in their 50s, and saying, oh yeah, my friend went there, and oh my goodness, he just spent the whole time like sitting up a tree. He left with nothing. He's really lost in the world now because he went there. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I was having a discussion again with my youngest child yesterday, where on the side of our van it says teaching children, not curriculums, which I've always had a slight problem with because it's not grammatically accurate as a past English teacher, but never mind. And we came up with that quite a long time ago, didn't we, Liz? Anyway, so she was asking me what curriculums were, and so what a curriculum is, and I explained to her what it was, and then talked about Forest School and talked about the difference between learning with a curriculum and learning in a self-directed type of way. And then we got in the car and we're listening to the Chronicles of Narnia at the moment. And, loads of people have got issues with C.S. Lewis. And as I read the books when I was younger and watched the BBC adaptations and loved it. It's just like great stories, isn't it? Great storytelling.
Yeah, they are.
But then we were at the silver chair, and literally having just finished that conversation, we put the silver chair on, and the character of Eustace goes, oh, I'm really annoyed that it's the end of the summer holidays, obviously in more old-fashioned language. I don't think he said, I'm really annoyed. What a drag. There's the end of some days, and I have to go back to school, and Lucy and Evan say, oh, I thought you liked school. And he goes, well, I thought I did until spending time with you. They call it the experiment house. And I wanted to go there because I thought it meant that we did lots of experiments with Bunsen burners. But it turns out that we're the experiment, and we can do what we like. And children decide what they learn and decide what they do. And it turns out that mostly what they want to do is bully each other. And I was like, right, C.S. Lewis, okay, this is not your personal opinion much. And I was like, I bet he's talking about Summerhill, he's talking about this.
Wow.
I know. It's so weird.
I don't remember. I've read it, but it was a long time ago. I was a child when I read it, so I don't remember. But wow.
There's quite a lot of like right-wing, very entrenched traditional values all the way through it, that I increasingly have issue with. But but yeah,
but what a great opportunity to talk about those when you read it with children. What a great opportunity to actually say, well, you know, this is a great story, but how about this problematic bit in it? Because now this is what sorry I've jumped in and interrupted you. What I've always done, so when my eldest was really little, I used to change the books to make them less problematic, and like remove words and change words and try and make them more inclusive. But I suddenly was like, hang on, I'm doing the wrong thing here. I'm missing a trick. I'm missing this opportunity here. And so I changed and I swapped to pointing out how it was problematic to my eldest. And now she's reading books and she'll be like, that's a bit sexist.
Yeah.
You know, which is amazing because she's noticing it and she's using critical thinking, which is way more valuable than pretending it doesn't exist.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we do exactly the same thing. And there's loads in the Narnia books to talk about, you know, to just pause it and go, oh, what do you think about that? They keep telling Lucy to like stay behind and be looked after and not go and explore the potentially dangerous situation, and that someone will stay behind and guard her. Like, what do you think about that? You know, and they will go, oh, that's a bit sexist. How come, you know, she has to stay behind just because she's a girl and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I completely agree with you. Do you think, what would you kind of say if people perhaps did have that kind of vision of self-directed education or sociocratic education where, like C.S. Lewis, they might go, that's all very well, but what about situations? Because I've heard that said about Steiner education as well, that actually children of people that I know have said, they haven't had a great experience because they had some potentially quite violent experiences, or, you know, they got hurt, or they found this quite sort of challenging. What would you say to kind of... Go on.
Right.
Okay, she rubs her, rubbing your hands together like that.
I love this question. So in terms of whether people do what the people do after democratic education, I suppose I'd say in response, well, there's a lot of people who leave mainstream school with not very much as well. I think mainstream school fails a lot of people too. So to take one example and say, well, actually, this doesn't work is not really fair. You have to take an aggregate. Anecdote isn't evidence. So there's a book by someone who lives in Bristol, actually. I'm just going to go, it's right in here, so I'm going to go and grab it. It's written by the charming Hussein Lucas, who's been really supportive of the garden. It's called After Summerhill, and it's looking at lots of people who went to Summerhill and what they did afterwards.
I think I read about that in The Guardian or another paper. Just read a little blurb about it. Yeah. And what it shows is that actually people go on to do all kinds of different things, and not everyone is super successful. And yes, some people probably are a bit lost, but you know, I don't think anyone's saying that democratic or sociocratic or self-directed education is some kind of magic bullet to fix all of society's ills, although it might be if it's done right. But you know, so you wouldn't expect necessarily everybody to go on and be fantastically, you know, not everyone who leaves here is going to be some, fantastic, successful person.
But the same is true.
But the point is you. Sorry, say that again.
The same is true of mainstream school, isn't it? If you said everybody who goes to a mainstream school is going to be a massive success, you would get laughed out of wherever you said that. It's not, but it's not built to do that.
No, it isn't. It isn't. And also you want to look at what success means and what that means to individuals and what it means to society. There's some research that's been done on the Self-Managed Learning College in Sussex, which is a fantastic project. They've had some research done on what people do after them. And I think there's something like every single young person who's left, and they've been going for 20 years, so they've got a lot of data. Like everyone's gone on to either further education or an apprenticeship or employment, like it's, you know, or set up their own business, basically. They, you know, and what mainstream school can say that? What mainstream secondary school can say that? Like it's none. And unless it's a private school, maybe. So, and also there is a thing around, I don't know, I don't doubt that fewer middle class kids will go to university with this system of education, but I think maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe there's some middle class kids who are going because they don't know what else to do and it's just expected of them, and maybe they'd be happier with an apprenticeship, or they'd be happier doing a trade or being an artist. And you know, I feel like it's better to own your mistakes than, you know, be successful on someone else's terms. So I don't know. Yeah. In terms of the experience when they're there, I think unless the space is held, I think you are just replicating some of the problems in society. So one of the reasons why we are unconditional is specifically to avoid situations where people do have those, feel unsupported, basically. And I want to be careful because I actually I love Summerhill and I'm a really big fan of a lot of what they do. And I don't want to kind of say that they're doing the wrong thing. And also because I don't know how they might have changed and implemented things, and, you know, but I do know that if you don't hold the space and actively try to challenge the societal way of dealing with conflict in a manipulative and judgmental way, you're just going to replicate that. And when you have things like judicial committees that punish people, which you do in democratic schools sometimes, it is just replicating that judgmental and hierarchical, because hierarchy is really key here as well. You're just replicating those social functions, and I think that's not, I don't know, it's just one way of doing things, and it is the norm in our society, and I think there's a better way of doing it, which is why we do things at the garden. But we also don't, coercion is a really important point here, because we don't want to be kind of saying you have to do this or you can't do this. And so if someone if we were doing conflict resolution and someone said I want this other person to be punished, which it hasn't actually ever come up, to be honest, rather than saying, well, you can't do that, we, you know, we'd probably just want to talk about it more and about, you know, talk through the nature of punishment and, you know, and whether that works and whether it doesn't. But it's interesting.
I can see how dispel any notions of revenge if you mentioned it and you got met with lots of talking and lots of I feel like I would lose interest in any sort of revenge. I'd just be like, do you know what, leave it, I'm not even bothered anymore. Exactly. And so precisely, so I'm really glad that no one ever has said like, I want punishment, that's what I want from this is how I'm going to resolve this, is if this other person is punished, because God, it'd be really tricky. But we find that like young people don't generally, they don't even want a sorry most of the time. They're not even interested in a sorry. What they want is usually, more often than anything else, they want to be heard. They want their feeling. They want to be able to express their feelings about what happened and to be heard and understood more than anything else. And sometimes they want a commitment for something to happen so the situation doesn't happen again. But almost never want a sorry, because it's kind of meaningless, really, isn't it? I wonder if I could pick your brain. This is on a completely personal thing. I'm very interested at the moment in false memories, and particularly false memories that are attached to emotional situations. And I've noticed it recently with a couple of learners, and then if I look back, I can notice it in more. And that idea of like, so Gemma and I sometimes try and practice non-violent communication, you know, Marshall Rosenberg thing of going, I can see you're feeling this, and this is this, and also we mix in a bit of the stuff from Whole Brain Child of getting a whole narrative going through, so that you get to the like, oh yes, and then do you remember Whole Brain Child?
I'm just going to grab a pen and write that down.
It's gone. It's just gone. Just run to get a pen.
I can see some.
How are you, Gemma?
I'm fine. I'm just admiring Artemis's slippers by the door that look like huge bear paws with claws.
Oh, that's my partner's slippers, actually.
They are amazing.
My slippers are now you've mentioned slippers. Hang on a minute. Hang on.
What are you?
No. My slippers, which actually need fixing at the moment, which is why they're here, are fox slippers.
Oh, they are incredible.
Tails.
With a tail going up the heel. That is incredible.
That's amazing.
Sorry, where were we? Whole brain child. Sorry, I need to write this down because our conflict resolution was based on non-violent communication originally, but we've adapted it. So whole brain child, I haven't heard of.
Whole brain child is, and I forget
Dan Siegel and Tanya Payne Bryson. If I've got that right, I'll be amazed.
Bryson Payne, I think.
Bryson Payne.
Anyway,
and
They
balls.
have written a few books, and it's a lot about neuroscience and kind of left brain, right brain, bringing that stuff together. And one of their things is about finishing the narrative, so getting through past the, like, children will tell you, I fell over and I hurt my knee, for example, and if you help them by going, oh yeah, and then who came and checked if you're okay? Oh, Sophie came and checked if I was okay. Oh, and then what happened? Oh, and then you looked after me. And so when they then have any memory of it, they get the memory of the whole thing rather than getting stuck at the difficult bit. And that can happen on a long term for, like, big trauma things, like catastrophic life events, or it might be an incident that happened in a play cycle. But what I'm interested in is this kind of false memory thing where either immediately or afterwards, learners will justify their own actions with part of a narrative that you as an observer know didn't happen. So you might watch someone and they'll go, well, I was walking along and I threw my stick completely accidentally, and then I dropped it on the floor, and then for no reason Millie came up and twatted me in the back of the head. And as an observer, you want to go, well, that's not actually what I saw. What I saw was you kind of look at Millie, you followed her for a bit, then you threw your stick at the back of her. Do you know what I mean? You go, your recollection of it isn't accurate. And so but then you don't want to just undermine someone who's upset and go, what you're remembering is wrong, you know? But then I'm wondering how, if you meet that with something democratic where you're going, okay, well, let's discuss the incident. Do the children fact check each other, or do you have to find someone impartial who can go, well, my account of it is this and my account of it is this?
Support the podcast today by becoming a Patreon member at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yes, so our conflict resolution process was originally based on nonviolent communication, and then we've tried to adapt it because we found that it wasn't accounting for power dynamics. So it was very able to be manipulated for people who were very linguistically skilled, very articulate people were able to kind of manipulate the process and get the upper hand.
Right.
So now we've sort of tried to incorporate power dynamics to make it a bit more it's an ongoing process, really. It's not perfect, but it's a bit better than it was. And we start, so the first thing to do, it's a really simple, quick method, theoretically quick, not actually quick in practice. And the first step is to establish what happened. And how that's done is asking everybody in turn who saw what happened to say, and nobody's allowed to interrupt each other. And that can include adults. So if there's an adult who's seen what happened, then we can say. It's really important to remain impartial, so we're not allowed to put any sort of judgment on what happened. It's all just literally, this is what I saw, without any kind of telling other people what, which is hard, really, really hard sometimes, because sometimes young people are jerks.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, exactly, yeah, for sure. False memories is an interesting one. We have come across that before, mainly with children who likely are neurodivergent, who like to go off on wild tangents to sort of avoid resolving the conflict. These sort of an echolalia, sort of repeating other people's stories as if they're their own, but also like as a way to avoid resolving the conflict. I mean, that just sounds. Is it a false memory? Do they really believe that's what's happened, or are they just lying to try and get out of it? Do you really think it's a false memory rather than just, oh no, actually?
Yeah, and it's very interesting when the stories or the memories or the recollections of events are intermingled with feelings of physical pain, because that can cloud lots of things, can't it? So, or the other way around, where sometimes a sort of verbal conflict is felt physically by somebody. So they will say, they really hurt me. And actually, there was no physical hurt that happened, but they are translating that as a physical hurt,
for sure.
And now, or they tripped over a table leg, but then the story becomes so and so pushed me into the table, when actually it was a complete accident. And that's really fascinating about what's happening in the brain there, and how and kind of links to how the brain invents stories to explain the world. And we all do it all the time.
Like protecting the ego, isn't it? Of going, you can either acknowledge a mistake or a shortcoming or even an accident, or your brain offers you this other scenario of going, well, do you think someone might have pushed you? And the brain kind of goes, yeah, that's probably what happened. That's easier to digest. I'm going to go with that one.
Yeah.
But I quite like that idea of going round and each person kind of telling what they saw, because that may help that young person. If it was just us as an adult going, no, that didn't happen, I saw this, then as you say about that power dynamics, and that young person might feel, especially if they genuinely do believe that such a thing happened and you saw that it didn't, they might feel quite sort of persecuted and singled out by you as an adult going, no, that's not true. Whereas if it's coming from everybody in a kind of non-judgmental way, which is a challenging thing to do, isn't it? Like, as you described, to try and get that to be spoken quite a level and neutral way, rather than, no, you liar, that didn't happen because blah, 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 to try and get rid of that. Whoa, that's a challenge.
Which you can do yourself as an adult when you retell, but it's really difficult to impart on then a group of children. Say, when you retell, can you retell it in this way? That's an extra layer of challenge on top of them remembering, and on top of the social power dynamics that are going on between,
Can I ask a bit more about your project actually?
Right.
Like, is it the same young people that come like a few days a week? Is that right?
Yeah. So it's 2 days a week at the moment for either home educated or children who are flexi schooling, and it's mostly the same children who are there both days. There are a couple that come just 1 day a week, and lots of them we've known for a long time, because we also run parent and toddler groups. So some of our young people had started with us when they were sort of 18 months old, and then they graduate, and that's why a lot of them have sort of investigated the flexi schooling route, because they've gone, I don't want my child to miss out on the forest, so they're going to still come to you 1 day a week, and they've arranged that agreement with school. So we've got maximum 15 children at the moment in the group, same as you, and it's us two running it. Occasionally we have had a third person if we've needed to, because of additional needs that are going on in the group, but at the moment it's just the two of us. And some of those young people have been coming for a long time now. Like, I think our longest home ed kids have come for 3.5 years. So some of them are sort of growing together, and it's really interesting to kind of see that journey for them and see the group evolve.
And we always talk about,
lovely.
It's kind of similar. Artemis, I don't know if you would have similar things, but like when you reflect on like a practice, so like you were saying, the conflict resolution thing wasn't working because it was able to be manipulated. It's almost one of the benefits I used to think of school teaching was that if I realized something wasn't working, in September, I could pretend that had never been the system, and you can completely go, oh, no, that's never a thing we've done, shush now. But when you've got learners that are coming over, you never get that, like, which in some ways is great, because you get that shared learning, that shared experience. And in other ways, there's times where you go, I wish we could just go, right, this
reset.
Is the routine now. This has always been the routine for these learners. Because if something's, so there have been times, for whatever reason, that we might have let reflections at the end of the day slip because there've been needs, or the play schemes at the end of the day are quite thick. And sometimes Gemma and I reflect back on each other and go, do you know what? We've actually let the reflections at the end go. We need to kind of bring them back because we know they're beneficial and valuable. But then you go, if it was a new set of learners, you could go, right, well, we'll just let this group just trail off. And when the new lot come in, we'll go 2:30 is always reflection. But you can't do that with a group of learners that are coming over a long period of time, because you get to 2:30 and you go, right, reflection time. And they go, what are you on about? That's not a thing we do. And it's...
Yeah, I mean, I guess my lot, the poor things, are just so used to me changing everything all the time. but I feel that makes them more resilient and adaptable, maybe. I'm like, because we're explicitly sort of try and take a more scientific approach. So a lot of alternative education, it can be quite dogmatic and, dare I say, cultish. And it's something that I was really keen to not fall into that trap. And even ones that say, oh, we're not dogmatic, but are you though? Are you actively seeking out where you can do things better all the time? Like, are you actively saying, actually, does the evidence still support what we do? Is there any more evidence? What about the community? What about how the community interacts with what we do? Is that working for this particular community? Is there a way we can, like, it has to be constantly asking those questions about how you can be better, which is like, more of a sort of a scientific approach, I guess. And I think when you have that thing of like, there is no set way of anything that we do, we can always change and adapt depending on information we have, whether that's comes from within the community or outside of it. I think that's actually builds a lot of resilience, both for the individuals but also for the project itself.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting as well to voice those personal reflections and say to the group, we've realised that we haven't reflected for a long time, and we've thought about that, and we've realised that we regret that, and it's a mistake, and we'd like to change that. And that helps with the power dynamics, as you've been saying, that we view ourselves as part of the learning community, and as you described, we don't always do things correctly all the time, and it's our fault, and we want to rectify this, and that kind of thing, and discussing about why it's valuable, like why are we doing this anyway. That's really valuable, isn't it, to actually rather than just go, this is the routine and we always do it, to go, this is a routine we think is worth keeping, and this is why. Discuss.
For sure. That you're modeling reflection, you're modeling that, that constantly questioning what you're doing and saying, is this still okay for us? Is this still working for us? I think that's so powerful. There was something I wanted to I want to go back to this sort of false memory thing. So I'm really fascinated by the situation you described to me. When we first started, we were supported by two groups that don't happen anymore, called, one was A Place to Grow in Stroud and the other one was The Greenhouse near Bath. The Greenhouse is starting up again.
Oh, I think I've met somebody who was involved with that at a storytelling course.
Oh,
that's
cool. They generously gave us so much advice and support when we were setting up, and it was amazing. And there's this incredible guy called Albert Lamb, who maybe you should get on the podcast sometime. He went to Summerhill. And he was a mentor at A Place to Grow, and has obviously got, I think he's in his 70s, and he's got so much experience of democratic education. And what he said to us was that to have a solid community, the minimum is like 3 days. It has to be the same people for 3 days consecutive, and they have to be consecutive days. And so without that, like, it's really hard to build up that kind of solid sense of community that you need, so that they really trust in your system, and so they know that that's really the things that you say are going to happen, and they trust that everyone's on the same page. And it's I wasn't too sure about that. When he first told me this, I wasn't that convinced, but I thought, well, let's give it a go and see if it really is necessary. But actually, having now run the garden, I've become convinced that is the case, because we've tried allowing certain people with specific needs to come less than 3 days a week, and they just haven't felt part of a community. They have really, there's been a really noticeable difference in how engaged they are in all of our processes and with each other. And now I'm sort of a convert to that idea that actually 3 days, there is something about 3 days as a minimum.
The thing about dropping in and out of any community group, that, whether that's dropping in and out over a day, we've had experiments ourselves where we had children that we went, oh, well, the group runs all day, but if you want to come at lunchtime, that's great. And then after a while you go, oh, okay, this doesn't work. No. You're not at the same energy level. You haven't got the experiences that they have in the more, I think.
And the rest of the group in the morning were, sorry to interrupt, they were like waiting for this person to arrive, so they weren't settling, and it was not
exactly. So and the other thing that he said to me that was really great advice, which is when you don't have very much structure, when there is very little of it, what you do have becomes really important. And I think that's true as well. So really putting a lot of emphasis and time and energy, and also sometimes, like, sorry guys, this is what we need to do. These are the systems that we need to have in place, so we don't have to have like manipulative behavior management, so nobody gets told off. You know, we have to have another way to resolve problems. So I'm afraid this is what we've got. We're always open to being challenged on it and trying to improve it, for sure, but for the moment this is what we've got. And so we do say this is the price of admission. You know, you engage with the meetings, you engage with the conflict resolution. That's how it goes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you want to ask me about false memories? Was that tied up in a...
Oh no, sorry. I just like, because we don't tend to get that a lot, and I find that really interesting. And I think it's partly because lying is sort of a bit taboo at the Garden, and that's not something that we have explicitly encouraged. It has just, like, the community, if someone is perceived to be lying in a conflict resolution, so if there's like people having different opinions about what happened, it's sort of a bit, you know, people are really shocked. The only time we've really had emergency meetings is when we can't get to the facts of what's happened, because I guess the community thinks that someone is lying, which is really interesting.
That probably comes out of like a system where, if you know that not that nothing is punishable, but you know that the outcomes of making a mistake are not that you're going to be chewed out and reprimanded and doing whatever, then it does empower everybody to own there's almost less reason to lie, because and this is why I think it was interesting, was one example that was quite recent was there wasn't a big group of children watching. It was myself and 2 children, and one of the children was unhappy with the result of something, but he flipped it onto me, and the false memory became about me and what I had done and what I had said earlier in the day, and all these really interesting kind of things came out. And I was going, because I was doing something else at the same time, I was giving him some space and going, okay, are you happy here? He's like, yeah, I'm just, upset, but staying in one place. And every time I would go back, there was more. He had I'm using air quotes, people can't see, he had remembered more reasons that backed up why he was in the right and why I had done things wrong, which was just very interesting to kind of navigate myself, because there wasn't anybody else to pull in and go, okay, well, I don't know that happened, or, well, let's ask someone so-and-so because they were there. And I do think it was just this kind of self-preservation. How do I make myself feel okay about what's happened?
Yeah.
And it must be someone else was at fault. Artemis, I'm aware that we've taken up far more of your time than we asked for. Is there anything?
No, it's fine. I love it. This is my favorite. Talking about education is literally my favorite thing. My poor children, if anyone ever asked me about education when we're out and about together, they roll their eyes now, because they're just like, oh, we're going to be here forever.
This is why I can't go to toddler groups with my own 2 young children, is anything that comes up about pedagogy or school or whatever else. And I'm like, well, I've read a lot of books, and let me tell you.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what I was like on the PGCE? Can you imagine?
Yes.
My proudest moment was when one of my classmates said, Artemis, I love the look of fear in the lecturer's eyes whenever you raise your hand.
Yeah, it's similar. The last teaching job I had, which I left after only a year, it was not a successful experience. My head of department gave a leaving speech for me, and the only thing that they could say was, if you want a laugh, just get Gemma about education and just watch how angry she gets. Okay, bye, good luck in whatever you do. I was like, thanks, dude, thanks. That's what I'll be remembered for. Just like ranting at people.
I would definitely take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
Nominally, this is a podcast. It's actually a support group that we call people in. We all vent, and then we all feel a lot better. It's great.
So for people who are listening, Artemis, is there a place where they can kind of catch up with your thoughts and your projects and that kind of thing? Where can people find out about your work?
Well, we've got a website, which is thegardenbristol.org. We have a Facebook page as well, so if you just search for The Garden Bristol, that should come up. We do have a Twitter, but I'm not gonna, it's weird. I'm a bit rubbish with Twitter, so it's probably not much point. Where else? I've written one Medium article.
Yeah.
I probably should write some more, but
yeah, do it.
Is a thing.
And you are Bristol based, right? If there is anybody listening who's in that area and has home educating children,
I'll just pop round. Just come for a cuppa. My door is quite literally almost always open.
Right. Thank you so much for your time, Artemis.
Yeah, thank you, Artemis. Great to speak to you.
Oh, you too. Thanks, both. I've had a lovely time. Let's do this again.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Cool. Okay. Cheers.
Bye.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.